this video, please click the like and subscribe icons. Thanks and enjoy. In the early 2000s, a new era of American leadership dawned. But behind the patriotic rhetoric and televised addresses, the George W. Bush administration became a case study in what critics call the revolving door of American politics. The George W. Bush administration. When George W. Bush defeated Al Gore in the controversial 2000 election, ultimately decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, he didn't walk into the White House alone. He brought a team, many of whom were veterans of his father's presidency. 43% of 300 appointees had served under George H.W. Bush. In the State Department, over 80% of top officials had served under Bush Sr. At Housing and Urban Development, that number was more than 60%. It was a reunion of old Washington hands: Karl Rove, the political brain; Dick Cheney, who helped pick himself as vice president; and Donald Rumsfeld, a Cold War warrior ready to mold post-9/11 America. This wasn't just a well-connected cabinet. It was a fortress. Secrecy, critics say, became a defining feature of the Bush administration. From energy meetings behind closed doors to bypassing investigations into 9/11. Instead of having transparency, we got a war in Iraq. Instead of accountability, we found trillions were missing from the Pentagon. In 2001, just before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld admits that $2.3 trillion could not be accounted for. As of 2022, the DoD had failed 5 audits and could not account for 61% of their assets. To this day, the Department of Defense is the only federal agency that consistently fails their audits but continuously gets more funding. Born in New Haven, Connecticut, and a Yale graduate like his father, George W. Bush seemed destined for influence. After a stint in the Texas Air National Guard, he reportedly lost his flight status for not completing a physical. He moved into the oil business. He found Arbusto Energy, which merged into Spectrum 7, a struggling company eventually rescued by Harken Energy, allegedly because of Bush's last name. Bush sold 212,000 shares before Harken reports a $23.2 million loss. Insider trading? The SEC said no. But Bush's delayed filing and murky explanations raised eyebrows. With capital from Harken and connections from Wall Street, Bush led a group to purchase the Texas Rangers baseball team. He invested just over $600,000 for a 1.8% stake. When the team sold in 1998 for $250 million, Bush walked away with nearly $15 million. Not a bad return for someone who admitted he was all name and no money. In 1994, Bush ran for governor of Texas, defeating incumbent Ann Richards with 54% of the vote. Critics called him inexperienced. Richards dubbed him shrub. But money talks, and Bush's campaign was powered by oil and industry groups eager to weaken environmental controls. Those donors? Many were rewarded. Appointments to university boards, lifetime perks, and policy influence followed. Al Gore ran on a platform of environmental protection. Bush, backed by fossil fuel giants, represented business as usual. The energy industry won. The environment, not so much. He was a law professor, a governor, a senator, and ultimately, America's Attorney General. But behind the public image of patriotism and conservative values lies a story of political favors, corporate donors, and controversial decisions. This is the story of John Ashcroft. Born in 1942 in Chicago, Ashcroft was part of a long tradition of Ivy League elites shaping American policy. He graduated with honors from Yale in 1964, then earned his law degree from the University of Chicago just 3 years later. During his time there, he shared classes with Bernardine Dohrn, a future radical from the Weather Underground and a future FBI most wanted fugitive. The irony? Ashcroft would later be charged with upholding America's laws as the nation's top law enforcement official. In 1967, amid the growing Vietnam War, Ashcroft applied for an occupational deferment. He argued that teaching business law at Southwest Missouri State was vital to the national interest. In 1984, he became Missouri's governor. His tenure was defined by conservative Christian values and controversial policy decisions. Twice, he vetoed bills aimed at making voter registration easier, specifically targeting efforts led by the League of Women Voters. Ashcroft cited concerns over voter fraud. Critics saw political suppression. He also championed the state's largest economic initiative in a decade, a massive highway construction project. But the plan would soon collapse under its own weight, under-budgeted by $1.3 billion. Ashcroft distanced himself from the blame, pointing fingers at transportation officials. In 1994, Ashcroft stepped onto the national stage, winning a U.S. Senate seat in a landslide against Alan Wheat, the first black candidate to run statewide in Missouri. But questions quickly arose about the deep pockets funding his campaign. Among his top contributors, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Ashcroft co-sponsored legislation that would limit the liability of rental companies in the event of accidents. Enterprise contributed over $80,000 to his campaign. Coincidence? His campaign said no. They claimed he was simply fighting for employers. Then there was Premium Standard Farms, a corporate pig farming operation accused of polluting Missouri's air and water. The company donated to Ashcroft's campaign. Under scrutiny from groups like the Sierra Club, he returned the money. But the damage to his image lingered. By the late 1990s, Ashcroft had become a favorite of the gun lobby. The NRA poured nearly $300,000 into his re-election bid. In return, Ashcroft opposed 13 gun safety measures. But perhaps most damning was his connection to Enron. Just days before his failed 2000 re-election, Ashcroft's PAC received a $25,000 donation from Enron CEO Kenneth Lay. Despite the controversies, George W. Bush appointed John Ashcroft. Ashcroft was now in charge of the very laws and institutions he had, at times, maneuvered around. John Ashcroft's story isn't just about one man. It's about a system where politics, corporations, and law intersect in ways the public rarely sees. It's about privilege, power, and how easily they're traded behind closed doors. This is the revolving door of American politics. He never held elected office. He never earned a college degree. But few figures in modern American politics have wielded as much behind-the-scenes power as Karl Rove. Born in Denver in 1950, Rove's fascination with politics started early. At the age of 9, he was already a Nixon supporter, so fervent in his belief that he once got into a fistfight with a girl over Richard Nixon. Yes, really. As a teenager, Rove worked on Senator Wallace Bennett's campaign. And by his early 20s, he wasn't just helping politicians, he was crafting them. In 1973, at just 22 years old, Karl Rove became the national chairman of the College Republicans. The campaign to win that seat was brutal, so brutal, in fact, that both candidates declared victory. The final decision came down to one man, Republican National Committee Chair, George H.W. Bush. It would be Bush Sr. who introduced Rove to his son, George Walker Bush. A handoff of car keys in a parking lot would ignite one of the most consequential political partnerships in American history. From that moment forward, Rove and Bush were politically inseparable. Rove was the strategist. Bush was the candidate. Together, they would march from Austin to Washington, fueled by ideology, strategy, and money. But Rove's loyalties weren't just to politics. They were also to corporations. From 1991 to 1996, Rove was on the payroll of Philip Morris, yes, the tobacco giant behind Marlboro and Virginia Slims. He was paid $175,000 for his consulting work. George W. Bush knew about this by 1993. When Bush wins the Texas governorship, Rove and Bush's main focus was tort reform. This wasn't just political coincidence, it was strategic and deeply profitable. The plan? Limit lawsuits against corporations, cap damages, raise the bar for plaintiffs, and gut the power of trial lawyers. Behind it all, Karl Rove. Rove took credit for convincing Bush to pursue tort reform. And guess who benefited? Philip Morris, the tobacco industry, oil companies, medical giants, and Bush's donors. One of those donors was James Leininger, the so-called Daddy Warbucks of Texas Republicans. Through his PACs and personal donations, Leininger pumped nearly $4 million into Bush's gubernatorial campaigns. all while Bush pushed for policies that would protect Leininger's businesses and hurt ordinary consumers. But there's more. Rove wasn't just advising policy. He had skin in the game, literally. His financial portfolio included major corporations, Johnson & Johnson, Boeing, Pfizer, GE, and Enron. Karl Rove once called himself the architect of George W. Bush's presidency. But he was more than an architect. He was a strategist of systems, a builder of alliances between power and profit, a man who didn't need a degree to rewrite the rules of political influence. The legacy he left behind? A reshaped Republican Party, a deregulated economy, and a system where the line between public service and private gain grows ever thinner. Karl Rove may have worked in the shadows, but his impact still echoes in the light of day. If you've liked this video, please click the like and subscribe icons. Or, if you would like to get your own copy of Corporticians and Revolving Doors of Power, you can visit Amazon Books, Barnes & Noble's online bookstore, or visit clevelandkelly.com. That's KELLY.com. Be sure to keep an eye out for the next episode of Corporticians and Revolving Doors of Power.